The views and opinions expressed in this episode are solely those of the podcast owner and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any organizations with which they are affiliated. The podcast owner is employed by Haven for Hope, a homeless service provider. However, this episode is an independent discussion and is not affiliated with, endorsed by, or conducted on behalf of Haven for Hope. Any views or opinions expressed are strictly those of the individual speaking in their personal capacity. Anyways, let's have a moment.
Yeah, I'm having a moment.
Yeah, we're having a talk, a discussion, a debate, because apparently these two people are Apple users. And I am not.
I love that you're having this discussion on an iPad.
I am right now because my phone died. And it's not because it's a Samsung.
Oh.
That's not why it died.
Is that right?
That is right. That is right. Don't look behind the curtain.
There we go.
Anyways. So chime in with what you think about the debate between Apple and Samsung. Or not. Or comment if you want me to have a episode about that. Yeah.
Kind of feel like maybe that's a losing debate.
No, it's not.
No.
You think that because you have an Apple.
For sure.
There we go. All right. Now we're good. Ready.
Are we ready?
Great. Fantastic.
Yes.
Let's get it.
All right. Hold on.
Nina, are you ready?
Wait.
That's the real question.
That's the question every time. Am I ready? I don't know. Hold on. Does my hair look okay? Okay.
What about my hair?
Your hair looks awesome. So good.
Absolutely.
Aerodynamic.
That's what it is.
All right. I gotta say, let's get candid.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Nina, and I'm your host with Candid and Curious. And I'm super excited to be here today here at the Amazing Gemini's Productions with my producer, Chibi.
Hola, hola.
Hola, hola.
¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien.
Muy bien estar contigo. Me mucho gusto. Me gusta.
My name is
Nacho cheese.
Inigo Montoya.
My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Prepare to die.
My name is Chiquita Banana. You peeled my banana. Prepare to die.
I love it.
Bye.
Okay. That was Chibi. Everyone. Chibi's been awesome helping me get this podcast off the ground. And so Gemini's Production is an amazing place where you can have your podcast produced. You want to record an album, do that here too. But yeah, so today's guest I'm super excited for. We have someone here who is the CEO of a nonprofit who has an incredible story that they're going to tell us about today. And some of those topics may be a little sensitive. So, we're going to dive in. And I'm super excited to have you here, Ben. Thank you for joining us on the show.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah, you ready to get candid?
Let's get it.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself a little bit.
So I am local CEO of a nonprofit. We strive to help individuals who have experienced substance use disorder and homelessness to be able to find exactly what they need in order to recover while providing access to housing. We provide a supportive, sober living options for these individuals after they've completed treatment or out in the community so that they're able to figure out what steps they're going to need to take in order to accomplish their goals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
For sure.
But it's intense.
It is. A lot of our staff have actually completed our programs. And so it really gives us that lived experience kick that allows us to be able to support these individuals while they're making change. A lot of times individuals who've come in out of chronic homelessness or addiction or incarceration, a lot of times what they know is not going to be what's going to help them in order to succeed long term.
Right.
So we have to work with them to break down that mindset,
Right.
that old mindset, in order to just be able to see that the benefits of what abstinence and recovery and change could really look like for them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that sounds like it takes a while.
It does.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. For a person to say after a year that they've got it, they may, not to say that it's impossible, but just from my own personal experience, what I've learned is that it takes a little bit longer.
Yeah.
It takes a few years to really kind of figure out that. And then even after that, it's always evolving.
It is always evolving.
Sure.
Yeah. We're always creating and recreating like us and
Most
who we are
definitely.
as people.
And so I like the way that you put that, because as people, right, this is nothing that is new to everyone, right? People are always improving and seeing what works in their lives and then letting go of what doesn't. And so this process is just really looking at it from that standpoint and trying to figure out how we can use that to leverage change in their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you have an incredible story.
sure.
And I definitely want to kind of dive into that, because you didn't just become the CEO of this incredible nonprofit just because you just walked through the door and you applied, right? Like there were a lot of things that happened that led you to this point.
Sure.
And so I definitely kind of want to talk about that. So I don't know where you want to start.
I'll start from the beginning.
Yeah.
If it's cool. It just makes it so much easier to kind of start from where I was at to talk about, to ultimately get to the place of who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm local San Antonio resident, born and raised right here in San Antonio. Go Spurs, go. Not sure if I can even say that, but
I think it's copyrighted or something. We'll cut that out.
for sure. And so I grew up in a loving household, 2 parents. But early on, I experienced depression.
Mm.
And so part of the depression that I experienced, I'm somewhat light-skinned, and both of my parents and my brother at the time, all of them are dark-complected. And so I isolated very early on because I felt different.
Right.
I didn't feel a part of the rest of my family. And so my family was really involved in some things that I really began to start seeing that this is not me, this is not who I am. And so I experienced at a time when, in the 80s, when mental health was not talked about much,
Right.
surely not in minority communities,
Especially not for men.
especially not for men.
Yeah.
My parents got separated. And I internalized whatever happened. I was a kid. I don't really know. I was like the first grade. And I saw my parents kind of getting into it. And my dad left. And I thought it was my fault. And I don't know how to explain how I thought it was my fault. But for some reason, I just couldn't understand why he was gone. Why would he leave, And there were times where he would come back around and he would, or we wound up actually, my mom and my brother and I, we actually moved to Kerrville for 2 years.
Wow.
And so there were periods where we may see my dad, or he would come and visit us. And ultimately, my parents wound up getting back together
Right.
after 2 years. But by that point, I felt a little hopeless and I was angry.
Yes.
And so very early on, I found anger as one of the greatest coping mechanisms, because I could use that to not feel weak. Depression and fear was considered weak in our communities. And so, but anger, I could turn all of that I was experiencing into some kind of way that I'm upset. And so, of course, not fully knowing how to express myself other than to be angry or to act out, I felt the second grade. And so, which brought on more fear, more
Like shame and guilt.
more shame.
Yeah.
Absolutely. More shame, more, I'm not going to be I'm not going to be like the rest of my family.
Yeah.
And so also very early on, so my mom is from New Orleans, Louisiana. And so I saw a different lifestyle whenever I was around my mom's side of the family. And so, it's crazy, but they partied all the time. Anytime that I was there, they were drinking and there was, good music, and it just seemed fun. And I didn't experience that with my family in Texas. And so when I would see my family in Louisiana, I just figured that that's where I needed to be. Something in me at a very young age just said, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm supposed to be there. And so eventually, somewhere around the age of 5 or 6, I had my first drink. And I was at a wedding. We were in New Orleans, and there were kids' drinks and there were adult drinks at this wedding. I remember what I know now as Earth, Wind, and Fire, playing. And I equated me supposed to be in Louisiana as a way to feel good about my life, as well, I just need to do what they're doing.
Right.
And so I had my first drink.
Yeah.
And so that first drink.
Was that did you sneak it? What was, you just.
Yeah, totally. Everybody was having this great, amazing time.
Right.
And nobody was paying attention to the kids.
Of course not. Yeah.
Yeah. So I snuck a drink. And, I was a kid and I can't, and it was so gross. It was white wine or Zinfandel or something. And I had that drink and it was so gross. But I immediately felt this sense of comfort as a result of taking this first drink. I don't know whether I caught a buzz. I don't remember any of those things.
Was it a mental comfort or
Absolutely.
A physical?
Well, it was a combination of.
Yeah.
Even though I did not like the way that it tastes, I do remember finishing that glass. And so, I remember the way that it tastes. I don't remember if I caught a buzz or any of those things, but I just remember, feeling a warmth come over me. So that's physical, of course.
Yeah.
Naturally. But then I also saw that it comforted me mentally and emotionally. And so it was in that moment that I said, that I mentally told myself, this is what I need to start doing. And so
you were 5.
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I rationalized it at that point that, I grew up in the 80s and they had DARE program, and we were already being taught that kids shouldn't drink alcohol or do drugs. And so I got really involved in that at a really young age. When I remember coming back to Texas and kind of thinking, hey, well, I got to figure out how to get some more alcohol. My parents didn't drink. And so whenever I would go spend a night at friends' houses, I'd, in the middle of the night, go into the refrigerator, either in the kitchen or in the garage. Because 9 times out of 10, I knew parents, they probably had some alcohol somewhere. And so,
Sure.
And I'd sneak alcohol in the middle of the night. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a thrill that came with that. And the thrill was attractive to me.
Yeah.
And so just as much as doing the substance became so common for me, because I got so much of a thrill out of taking what wasn't mine, what it didn't belong to me, that was also a part of the addictive behaviors that I held on to.
Yeah. And the thrill of am I going to get caught?
Yeah.
Type of thing. Yeah. Wow. So at this point, you're what, 7-ish?
Sure. So 7, I remember us we had to move from our home after we got back to San Antonio. My parents got back together. We had got a house, and then we stayed at this house for a little while, and then we got an apartment. I was starting the 6th grade, and going from elementary school into the 6th grade, it was a big difference because
yeah, it's middle school.
It's middle school,
yeah.
right? And it's big kids and
formative time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't dress like a lot of the kids dressed. We didn't have. My mom surely wasn't going to spend $50 on a Tommy Hilfiger polo shirt or anything, any of those things, right?
Yeah.
And so I did what I could to fit in. And so a lot of that included just hanging around older guys. And some of those older guys introduced me to marijuana. Yeah. And so I started smoking weed. summer of the sixth grade, going into the seventh grade.
Yeah.
And I would knock off pretty hard on that. I wasn't a very good
Student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so
Yeah.
I didn't try hard in school. I did just enough to get by, just enough to pass. And it was because a lot of what I had experienced as a kid, and it carried on, through a lot of my life. And I really internalized those feelings. And the more I, instead of trying to figure out how to change the behavior and get help or ask somebody to please talk to me, tell me what I should be doing, I turned to alcohol and drugs as a way to just cope with what I was experiencing.
Yeah.
And so hanging out with those older guys, kind of partying and doing those things, I committed my first crime at 15.
Okay.
I skipped school one day, and a bunch of us just had this crazy thought of breaking into a house, and me trying to prove myself.
Right. Because I'm assuming you were like the youngest in the group.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So me trying to really prove myself, I was the first one to go in, you know?
God.
Yeah. First one to go in, and we actually got caught.
Okay.
And, while this is daytime breaking into a house,
Wow.
and neighbors were around and they saw, police were called. Police caught us pretty quickly. And I just remember really thinking, I'm like, well, this is not fun. This is not favorable.
Right.
But the idea of accepting the blame for everyone else would give me like street cred.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead, when the police officer was asking, well, who did it? Who went in the house? Da, 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 I said, I did.
Right.
Yeah. I said, nobody else went in. I did.
Wow.
Yeah. That was really dumb.
Looking back.
Yeah.
I could have maybe not done that. Yeah.
Looking back, yeah, that was really dumb.
Yeah.
Because I thought I had earned some type of,
Right.
I had earned everyone's approval. And actually, I didn't.
Yeah. What happened to the other kids?
They let them go.
Yeah.
Yeah, they let them go because I took the blame. And so it started raining while I was in the process of talking to these officers. And, for a long time, I got this really ugly idea of it's raining, bad things are going to happen.
Right.
And I'll, probably mention some of that later on. But some other times I went to jail and it was raining and soaking wet. Yeah. So never been a real big fan of being out in the rain.
Right.
Yeah. And so a lot of what I experienced just kind of going through high school after that time was me being a follower. And I got out, after actually they wanted to give me some time, and I was locked up for a little bit at 15. They let me out. I was able to go back to school. My mom had this plea with me where she said, only thing I want you to do is graduate high school. She says, I don't know what you're going to do after that. She says, but I've just, she's like, I just want you to walk across the stage.
Yeah.
And so I did what I could. I showed myself to be smarter than I always believed myself to be. Summer school, I tested out of some classes, night school, and I was able to get, like almost a year and a half worth of credits.
Yeah.
In 2 semesters, and so which put me up to be able to graduate with the rest of my class.
Right.
But after high school, because my mom's hope was, well, I just want to see you walk across the stage, and after high school, I graduated. Now what? And so with no real direction, I naturally turned right back to with what I knew. And so it included kind of hanging out with some of these guys who didn't have anything going on in their life. They lived to party. And life was a joke, and it was a game, and it was all about having a good time. And that's really when I noticed what addiction was.
Wow.
Yeah. And so...
Like you noticed it in that group, or you noticed it...
I noticed it within
yourself?
Yes, within the group.
Yeah.
But I noticed it within myself.
Okay.
Just because the things that I was giving myself to, like accepting and rationalizing, in the recovery world, we kind of call those Dauphine moves. And so I was doing a lot of that.
Yeah.
I remember, there was one night where it was super late. I didn't have a car. I was, using the bus. Nobody else was capable of driving me home. I was still living with my mom at this time. And so, and I couldn't stay where we were partying at. And so I just started kind of wandering in that area that I was in. And I saw a couch that someone had thrown out, and it was behind a building.
Yeah.
So I sat down and I went to sleep. And when I woke up in the morning, I had this really crazy thought of, well, if this is what homelessness is, this isn't so bad.
Right.
I was like, I got money in my pocket. I still have my drugs. I said, I'm still dressed good. I said, I'm okay. This isn't bad. Until it got bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Until
Until it got really bad. And shortly after that.
So you stayed the night on this couch.
Mm-hmm.
And so was that, because you said you were living with your mom. What was there a turning point there where you just decided not to go back to your mom's house, or what?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I did. And so I had a job at that point, but I was, I would call in all the time. Sometimes I would go home to my mom's house, and sometimes I wouldn't, and at one point I just told her, I said, hey, I'm probably not going to be coming back. And I packed some stuff and I left. Yeah.
What did she say?
She cried.
Yeah.
She cried because she already knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of growing up in Louisiana, and some of our other family members who have also had issues with substance use disorder, she knew where my behavior was leading to. And so when I grabbed those clothes and said, I'm gone, I'm probably not going to come back, she cried. And it hurt me.
Yeah.
This is my mom, like I've always kind of been kind of close to my mom. And so yeah, I just, really just looked at her and I said, well, I got to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got to go. And so even after that, we didn't have cell phones back then.
Right.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet.
They're on the way.
But I had a beeper.
Oh, yes.
And so she would blow me up, 911, just to check on me, see how I was doing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, because I knew it was her, I'd ignore her. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I would feel that if I, did talk to her, it'd probably kill my buzz.
Right.
Yeah. And so I didn't want to do that. So one day somebody introduced me to cocaine. And cocaine allowed me to drink more.
Right.
A lot more. So much to the point to where it was almost as if I never had to stop drinking. And so drinking had really become life to me, because it was like, because of the depressive behaviors that I had as a child, and isolating and kind of staying off to myself, drinking allowed me to have this Superman type of mentality, right? Where I was able to conversate, I was able to laugh and tell jokes. I just became like this person who felt comfortable with everything that was going on around them. And so before cocaine, I couldn't drink long enough in order to keep that lifestyle going. And so eventually I'd pass out or whatever that looked like.
Right.
And so at that point, when I started doing that, I just quit working. I just quit because I surely couldn't keep a job. And so that's when I turned to crime, committing crimes in order to support my habit. Even the guys that I was hanging around, the people that I was hanging around, like, they weren't into that. And they were like, so I had to go to a lower socio group.
Because your friends they were like, oh, we're not gonna do that.
Yeah.
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 Interesting.
And so I started hanging out with other drug addicts.
Yeah.
because I wasn't working and because I didn't, go home. I didn't have anywhere to go, and so I would. There were times where I slept on people's couches, or maybe depending on whatever crime I committed, I'd have enough money and I'd just go get a motel room.
Right.
Um,
Because what was your main, what would you do that would make you money? Like, what crimes were you committing that would
stealing.
Yeah.
And so, I think back of, that mindset that I had started accepting that it was okay to go into when I was a kid and going into people's garages or in their refrigerators late at night just so I can steal a beer or sneak a beer, or alcohol for that matter.
Right.
I had always got such a thrill out of that. And I believe that if I was able to continue to keep the thrill going, right, then it would be enjoyable. And so I was committing crimes. I was stealing. I mean, I'd run up on people at the ATM, and knock them over and take their money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a lot of that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I had a friend, he had a gun, and, we drove around our side of town, and we helped people up. Got shot at it a few times. Almost lost my life on a couple of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
Pulling a gun on the wrong person.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so one day I happened to be walking through a neighborhood, and I just saw the mailman coming by, and he put something in a mailbox, and I went in the mailbox, and it was a stack full of checks. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I can just, if they're getting checks coming to their house, that means they've got money in their bank. And so I wrote a fake check and went to the bank and then cashed it, and it worked. And
Really?
yeah. And so then I started doing that pretty regularly until I got caught. And they gave me a bunch of probation. First, a real felony as an adult. And I was out maybe a month before I committed another crime and got caught. And then they locked me up for a while.
Yeah. What's a while?
4 years first.
Okay.
Yeah. 4
Yeah.
years.
That's a long time.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. And kind of going into these Texas prisons was scary. Here it is. I was a young guy. Everybody that I kind of came across was from Houston or Dallas or from the Valley, and there was nobody from San Antonio that looked like me. And so kind of going to those places was really lonely, and, hearing people talking about, man, I'm never coming home, or I got 80-year sentence, or I got 75 years. And I'm like, wow, what does that even mean?
Right.
And so that whole experience, it scared me.
Yeah.
And so I did well. I did my best to kind of stay out of the way. Went to college while I was in prison.
Okay.
I was able to just kind of get a little job, and, because of my classification, I started through letters and through visits, redeveloping relationships with my family. And one of the things my mom always said, she said, you're good now. She said, but you need to figure out what it's going to look like when you come home.
Right. When you get out.
Yeah.
Because at this point, how old were you when you?
23, 24.
Okay.
Yeah.
Still really young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would tell her, I'm like, well, I'll be okay. I just need to get a job.
Right.
If I just get a job, I'll be all right. But it didn't address I didn't want to address any of the things that I had experienced, any of those mental health disorders. I didn't want to address any of those things. I didn't want to address my past just because it hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Were you getting any kind of services for that, like while you were there, or no?
No.
They didn't have any programs.
They didn't have anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. They should.
They should have. And so, unfortunately, I happened to go back to prison a few more times after that.
Okay.
And so, Texas prisons, I'm not for sure what it was like in the 90s, but in the early 2000s, they were making changes just because of, big industry. Texas prisons.
Yeah.
And so they weren't providing a lot of services. A lot of people would come in and, kind of talk about Jesus or talk about, different spiritual practices or AA meetings and things like that. And I did all of those things just so that I could get out of my housing unit. But none of that meant anything to me.
Right.
Yeah, it just was a way for me to pass the time until I got out. And so the whole time, literally, that I was locked up, I didn't, have alcohol in prison. And, I didn't do any of those things. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. Worked out all the time. And I read a lot just so that I could figure out what change looked like. But really, it wasn't about wanting to make change. It was about me wanting to pass the time.
Right. Yeah.
Just so I could get my mind outside of what I was experiencing.
Right.
Yeah. And so sure enough, I got out, and the first little bit of money that I did get was back in the streets.
Right.
Yeah. Literally like the day after I got out. Yeah. And then maybe a month after that, I went right back for 2 more years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that was the cycle for me until 2008, when I couldn't find any cocaine one time when I was out, and somebody introduced me to something else.
Right.
It was crack cocaine. And so I tried that, and it was such a rush, and it was this weird, crazy, euphoric experience that after that first time of doing it, I never got the same high again, but I chased it.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was doing these types of things. And sometimes in between these periods of being incarcerated, I would find a treatment center and I'd try to get some help. But really, it wasn't about me seeking help. It was me just wanting to get my family back on my side, or how can I, I always kind of felt good about myself when I had nice clothes on.
Yeah.
And so I would go to these types of places so that I could just get off the streets, so that I could, maybe find a job and get me an outfit, and maybe I'll meet somebody and she'll have a car in her own place and I can, figure it out from there. But the moment that I put any substances in my body, anything that I had thought I wanted to do was out the window.
Wow. Just like that.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I spent the better part of my 20s and my early 30s just like that.
In that cycle.
Yeah. And things got really bad in the end for me, because in 2016, completely broken, completely miserable. I hated life. Depression, anxiety, anger,
Yeah.
fear. I didn't know how I would ever change. And so I remember one day I was sitting on the curb and I was thinking to myself, I was like, I know that I'm a better person than this.
Wow.
I said, this can't be my life. But all I could see what was around me at this point. And I said, maybe I ought to die. Yeah. And for me, my thought was that was the only way out.
Yeah.
Was that if I died,
You would be released.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be able to find relief.
Yeah.
Right. Before that, my mom had always told me, she said she was happy when I was locked up, because at least she knew I was safe.
And sober and
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And so it was June of 2016. I'm sitting on this curb and, I'm contemplating suicide. And it's probably like 100 degrees outside.
Yeah.
I had on all black. I had been awake for a week, hadn't drank any water, and psychosis was really setting in. And so I remember having a conversation literally with like the devil and the angel sitting on my shoulders.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to one side and I'm like, well, if I say that I'm going to give up, maybe I will give up. Maybe I'll stop. Maybe I'll change. And so then I remember talking to the other side, and I said, I just need help. I need a change. I don't know what that's going to look like. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And so I stood up and I said, I'm done. And sure enough, right when I said it that I was done, a car pulled up and they asked me to get in, and they asked me to help them to go commit a robbery. And
Oh, wow.
I was like, well, this is maybe not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so got in the car, we drove around for a little while, and I remember having this crazy, overwhelming thought that I needed to pray.
Yeah.
And so I was raised in the church. My family went to church, and that was the lifestyle that my family was a part of that I wanted nothing to do with.
Right.
And I remember praying. I said, you know what, God? I said, I don't care if I go to jail today. I said, I've done this so much.
Right.
That's normal. I said, but I pray that I don't get killed today. I said, I pray I don't lose my life. And so I kind of prayed that and, got back to the conversation where we were talking. We went to a liquor store.
Mm-hmm.
I ran in the liquor store. I ran out with some bottles. And the person that was behind the counter started shooting at me.
Yeah.
And as the bullets were going past my head, I could feel them. I mean, like the bullets were so close to my head, I could feel them going past me.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a combination of feeling them and hearing them go past my head.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
And I've got this overwhelming thought as the adrenaline's kicking in and it's pumping. And the only thing I can think of is that I'm fixing to die. My life kind of flashing before my eyes. And my mom's going to have to come identify my body because I'm a drug addict and I'm an alcoholic. And I decided to commit a crime where I got killed.
Right.
And I jumped in the car and we got away.
Wow.
And I didn't die. And we made it back to where we went, and I couldn't enjoy the high
Yeah.
at all because maybe it was a praying, and I don't know, but I just couldn't enjoy the high anymore. And I said, I'm done.
Yeah.
And it was that day that I decided to get help.
Wow.
Yeah. It was literally that day that I said, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And so I'm a little long-winded, but I went to this detox center, and all the people that had been to this detox center, they were there. I was like the last one to come in before they locked the door. People were going into an office, and then they were leaving. And I happened to ask a guy when it was me and another guy, the only ones left. And I said, well, where's everybody going when they go back there? He said, well, they're getting assessed for detox, finding out that they're a candidate, they need help. And they're getting an appointment card to come back in a couple of days when they have a bed open. And I remember thinking, like,
I don't have a couple of days.
I'm not coming back.
Yeah. Right.
And so I sat there anyway, and I was the last person to be seen. And sure enough, they took me back there. They asked me a bunch of questions. They gave me a drug test. They said, you're a prime candidate. You need our services. And they told me, they said, but we don't have a bed.
Right.
So you're going to have to leave.
Mm.
And at that point, I was ready to give up on life again.
Yeah.
Here it was. I had given everything that I had away in order to get help. And then the help wasn't available.
Right.
And so as I'm walking out, there was another door and somebody comes running out. Is there any, and they tell there was a security guard there. They said, hey, is there anybody else still here? We had somebody just leave detox. And so we just had a bed come open.
Wow. And you were still there.
And I was still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. And so that was the last day that was the last day for me that I was involved in that lifestyle. Because after detox, I was immediately able to get into treatment. And I stayed in treatment for 86 days.
Wow.
Yeah. I say 86 days because I was on the news. I was on Crime Stoppers and stuff. And so
for the liquor store.
For the liquor store.
Yeah.
I had completely forgot about it. It was almost foreign to me to even think about what I had done and the whole nine. And so, but I wound up turning myself in, and I sat and went back to jail. But jail was different this time because I wasn't coming into the jail trying to detox. I
Right.
wasn't coming into the jail with this mindset of, oh, I got to figure this. Who can I manipulate to put some money on my books and, all of these types of things. Going to jail that time was making a very clear-headed decision
Right.
to let my family know that, hey, I know y'all are aware that I was on the news.
Right.
And so I'm going to turn myself in hopes that the judge will grant me leniency.
Yeah.
And so I sat in the county jail, and for most of that time, I was facing 25 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Aggravated robbery.
My God.
Yeah. The owner of the store said that he shot at me because I had a gun on me. Yeah. And, the crazy part is that I didn't even remember if I had.
Right.
Based on the recklessness of the lifestyle that I was living,
Yeah.
and psychosis and just a mindset for just addiction. Literally, my mindset, all I wanted was the next one
Yeah.
more.
The next thing.
And so I didn't even know if I had
Right.
a weapon on me. And so,
Yeah.
but I'm here, so that didn't happen. And so I had this really great lawyer who was in 12-step recovery program.
Okay.
And he encouraged me, and I had a 12-step sponsor, and throughout the entire time that I was in jail, we worked the steps, and I picked up a sponsee in jail. And while I was in jail, I really had time to figure out what I wanted out of life. And I created some goals, and I said, well, if I ever get out, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So sure enough, I got out, right? The judge was actually really cool, and and I had some people write some letters on my behalf, and God and the program and all these things that just kind of came together to where I was able to get it was the aggravated robbery, and I had a manufacturing delivery case, and so that just kind of came out of nowhere. I'm not for sure where, but they dropped into lesser felonies, and I pled guilty, and they let me go. Time served.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I went right back to treatment. And as a result of going right back to treatment after I got out, I had this renewed vigor for wanting to show people that this works.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I became all about how can I help other people so that they can get just a piece of some of the joy that I'm getting to experience.
All right.
And so as a result, I was in treatment, and then around the time of completing this treatment program, my mom said, hey, you can come home. I said, no, thank you.
I pass.
And I told her why.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to come home to your house because I said, I know how I get. I said, I'm a grown man. I'm just kind of sitting around your house, and I'm going to eat up all your food. And the moment I get bored, I know what I do.
Right.
Yeah. And so then somebody encouraged me to try sober living. So.
And explain, what is a sober living facility?
Absolutely. So sober living it's a home, or can be an apartment complex. It can be a facility. They have sober living programs, beds, dorms, homeless shelters.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is, it's a place where people are held accountable to stay clean and sober while working a 12-step program and getting access to whatever services are available. They're encouraged to pay rent, go to 12-step meetings, have a sponsor, work some steps, and ultimately to help other people figure out what change looks like. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
So how long were you in sober living?
10 months.
Okay.
10 months. It was encouraged for me to figure out what I wanted to do out of life while I went and got a job. So went and got a job washing dishes in the Pearl, and I saw a lot of toxic people kind of working in the restaurant industry. The restaurant I worked at was a brewery, and so people were miserable, and I saw their alcoholism.
Right.
They were functional enough to still have jobs, And I used to tell some individuals, I'm like, it's only a matter of time for you before they find out that you're drinking the alcohol that we're supposed to be cooking with, or
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I worked that job and I was able to encourage other people to maybe think about what sobriety looks like, right? And to kind of walk alongside them and show them maybe some of the misery they may be experiencing.
Right.
One guy in particular, he was telling me how his wife was ready to kick him out, and his kids, were really upset with him, and I just encouraged him. I said, well, listen, I said, what's the common denominator for why things are just bad in your life?
Right.
And it took him a while to kind of get to it, but he finally said alcohol.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, well, I'm here with you. I'm here for you if you want to figure out what not drinking alcohol looks like.
Yeah.
And so eventually he did that and his life began to thrive. And from what I hear, I see him, on social media sometimes, and he's kind of running a kitchen somewhere, executive chef.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. All as a result of just encouraging him to do something different.
Right.
And so during that process, I was involved with this sober living program that was at the homeless shelter that I was staying at. I stayed there for 10 months. I enrolled in school, and I started getting my life back.
Yeah.
And I said, well, everything that I've ever given away or walked away from, I said, I'm fixing to get back. And I would use that as motivation to just, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do drugs. I had a guy tell me one time, he was a staff member, and he said, well, what does change look like for you? And I said, oh, I don't know. He said, well, whatever you used to do, whatever the behavior was, he said, you changed he said, you go 180 from that.
Yeah.
He said, if you didn't deal with your mental health, you deal with your mental health. He said, if you sagged your pants, he said, you pick up your pants and tie up your belt. And so it was all these different things, he said. And I told him, I said, well, I used to listen to rap music. And he was like, well, maybe you ought to listen to something else. And for me, for a while, I did. I listened to other things,
Yeah.
right? And so I learned to develop a real love and a real passion for music outside of rap music.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I went through time with this organization, through this program. And I knew that I wanted to do something more. And so I was going to school at that time to be a licensed chemical dependency counselor.
Wow.
I knew that would be an opportunity for me with all of the felonies. I've got 7 felony convictions. And so I figured it's kind of a prerequisite to be able to have that type of profession with that background. And so I was like, yeah, I'll do this.
Why not?
Yeah. And so what I really started doing was the things that I was learning in this human services program, I started implementing that with how I engage with other people.
Yeah.
And so the staff that was involved with this organization really started seeing that. And so they started paying attention to me a little bit more. And they saw how encouraging I had become. And towards the end of my stay, they offered me a job. And so when they offered me a job, I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sure. Why not? Right. And the job at the time was very entry level. It was just really to kind of monitor the individuals who lived in this program.
Yeah.
And to just be an encourager to them, support them, help them to find maybe some services, whatever it is that they were looking for, right? But also to kind of hold people accountable to follow the rules. And so I've always been a tough love type of guy. My family was like that with me, and I didn't like it, but I saw the value in being a tough love individual, because individuals who have kind of had their own way for a long time will manipulate. And I'm not saying that everyone's like that, but I just know that based on my experience and the experience of working with this specific population, sometimes it takes saying no.
Yeah.
Yeah, saying no. And so that also, saying no translates into other areas of my life as well, I'm sure so many other people's lives. And so I just worked for this organization even after I moved out. People were telling me, oh, you need to do sober living house in the community. I said, no, I'm ready to get my own place and be an adult and be a productive member of society. And
Yeah.
I was able to find an apartment. I had to put down a lot of money because of my background,
Of course.
but I stayed in that apartment for 6 years.
Did the program help you, like, get the apartment at all? Was there no? Okay, you had to do that on your own.
Had to do it on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that there were a lot of opportunities that could have led me to kind of getting some of that support. But I was a little bit more hard-headed or strong-willed in the idea that I knew I had to do this on my own.
Right.
I had to,
Yeah.
because if I didn't, I may never know what it's going to take in order for me to be successful long term.
And I think everybody has their own journey in that, right?
Absolutely.
Like, had you taken the help or those opportunities, like, I don't think anybody would have blamed you, or it would have been. Yeah.
No, surely not.
Yeah.
And so, early on, I was kind of unsure, a little confused about that process. And so I've seen people who didn't do well, and I've seen people who've done well.
Right.
And so I was a little biased, but I understand today that there are opportunities for a person to get access to supportive housing, right, that will help them to pay off maybe, broken leases.
Sure.
Or maybe pay CPS, an old bill or something along those lines, and even help assistance with the down payment,
Right.
to kind of get a person in. I was really gung-ho, and so I was like, while I was living at this homeless shelter, I bought a car,
Wow.
and so,
Yeah.
but I think I had a lot more support than some people.
Sure. And I don't think people understand how important that support system is.
Yeah.
When you feel you're already in a space where you feel alone and you feel shame and guilt and isolation. And then in addition to that, if you don't have any kind of support system, that's hard.
Yeah.
And so your parents, I assume, were extremely involved and supportive during this time.
They were.
Yeah.
They were. I redeveloped a relationship with my mom.
That's good. Yeah.
Never wanted to admit it growing up just because I saw it as a weakness, but I've always been a mama's boy.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Always been a mama's boy.
Yeah.
And my dad and I were exactly the same. So we butt heads all the time.
Yeah.
And so I reconnected with my family, and they've been so supportive, been involved in pretty much every step of the way. So
Yeah. They're pretty awesome people.
They are.
I've met your parents, I think, twice.
yeah, twice
They're really cool.
for sure.
Yeah. So you're working in this organization. You have this amazing job. At what point did you get the CEO position?
Yeah. So the first CEO who really kind of helped turn the organization around is who hired me.
Mm-hmm.
And she literally took me under her wing. And I was very raw, very rough around the edges.
A little feral.
Yeah. I don't know. There were days where, we may be having an important meeting, and I'm showing up in like Jordan's khaki shorts, t-shirt, and a ball cap, right?
Yeah.
And so she was the one who really kind of broke me out of that. And so
She was like, let's have a discussion
yeah,
here. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And very supportive, though. She really challenged my thinking.
Yeah.
And so then the guy who came in after her, this guy was hilarious.
Yeah.
And he'd make these strange faces, and he was very comical and humorous. But then he knew how to turn on the seriousness.
Of course.
And I admired that, right?
Yeah.
Because I've always been very playful, very, goofy. And so to be able to flip it like that, I was like, oh, this is the behavior that I need to start modeling, right? And so I started doing that. And so I really started kind of learning from him, and he would take me places, and he would introduce me to people. And I had a friend who was a mutual friend of our former CEO and I, and he told me, he said, and this is probably 3 years ago, so about a year before I got the position, he told me, he said, you need to just stay right where you're at. He said, you're going to be the next CEO. And I was like, did somebody tell you something?
Yeah.
And he said,
what do you know?
yeah, exactly, right? And so he said, no, he said, that's just a natural progression of how this works.
Huh.
He said, you're doing the work. He said, you're
Right.
helping people. He said, you got a good job. He said, it just works out like that to where people, you know, who have changed their lives get to go to the next level. And
Yeah.
so, and then about a year after that, our former CEO, he kind of told me, he said, hey, I just got a job opportunity. He said, I'm going to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said,
Guess what?
said,
It's your turn.
yeah. And so when he told me, he said, I said, well, what am I supposed to do? And he's like, oh, no. He said, you're going to take my job.
Right.
I was like, oh, no. I said,
hold on.
and so what's the term? The term is, I can't think of the term at the moment, but there's a term, you know, where
Imposter syndrome.
imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Right. And so I was like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm not good enough.
Right. Imposter syndrome is so real.
So real.
So real.
So real.
Yeah.
And it's taken a lot of counseling for me.
Yeah.
To get out of that. Yeah. It's taken a lot of counseling. It's taken a lot of counseling to just get out of a lot of stuff.
Right.
The effects of trauma and
Yeah.
and other mental health disorders.
And people, I don't think people understand a lot of that, right? Like when we think about homelessness
Yeah.
and we think about all that kind of comes along with that, there's always this narrative, right? And we run into it a lot. Like, oh, everyone that's homeless is a drug addict right?
Yeah.
And it's like, no.
Yeah.
But because that's not true. But it's like there is trauma linked
Absolutely.
to homelessness.
Absolutely.
And so it's like we need to focus, in my opinion, and this is my own opinion,
Sure.
we need to focus on that, right? Like let's shift to that mindset of, what was the trauma, like it's probably not one trauma, it's several,
Yeah.
And then kind of refocus on that narrative of, okay, well, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And how do we help you through that?
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that you had to kind of go through, did you go through like were there specific types of therapy, like cognitive behavioral, like were there different ones?
CBT,
Yeah.
DBT, yeah.
Which one, or was it like all of it that helped? Was there something that helped more than the other, or like what was your
I think
experience?
the cognitive behavioral therapy was really good, but there was another one that was really unique, EDMR.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was a combination of both of those that really challenged my thinking life differently.
Yeah.
Right. And as a result of seeing life differently, I was able to put some actionable steps to good use in order to completely change.
Right.
Yeah. And so it's not to say that the imposter syndrome doesn't try to come back.
Sure. I feel like it's always kind
Yeah.
of there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And so there's some times when I may walk into some spaces and I'm speaking in front of
Mhm.
500 people. And so there's, it's like, it's a little weird, but I push through all of that.
Yeah.
I've always been the type to want to face my fears.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so run head on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what works for me is it's just instead of allowing it to cripple me
Right.
from not being able to do the job or the task, I run towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good
And
for
so
you.
hopefully in the process of running towards it, I'll do okay. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
you just got to hit it head on.
Absolutely.
Stare it in the face.
Yeah.
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 I'm interested to know, because you had mentioned that when you were sitting on that curb
Mhm.
and you had said, I'm just done.
Yeah.
And all the events that led, on that day that led to you getting into the treatment center.
Yeah.
What was that? What was it feels like there's something that shifted. Like, what was it? You know what I mean? Like, what was that defining moment? Like, why then on that curb on that day and not, some of the other times where maybe your life was at risk?
Of wanting to end my life.
change.
Or to change.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So a minute ago, we were talking about trauma
Okay.
and just some of the trauma that I had experienced, some that had happened to me personally, physically, as well as some that I had just had experienced. And so a few months before that, a friend of mine got killed. A few months before that, I had another friend that had passed away. And so I've unfortunately gone to a lot of funerals, and to see what my friends or people I've known, see what their parents, their mom, because I love my mom.
Yeah.
I didn't want that. I didn't want that on her. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was embarrassed and hurt, through whatever I was experiencing. But I didn't want that narrative to sit with my family.
Yeah.
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 And so it was a lot of that pushed me outside of not wanting to end my life, or I just knew I had to change. Something had to be different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's powerful. Whenever I talk, there's always some defining moment, right? When I'm speaking to others who have dealt with either addiction, mostly addiction, coupled with homelessness. And it's like, there's something that shifts,
Yeah.
that it's just like, this is it.
Yeah.
And I'm done. And I'm always curious as what that is and why that is. You know what I mean? Because
Sure.
then how do we, for your experience, how do you use that experience to help others maybe realize that quicker? Or, you know what I mean? Like sooner? Is that possible?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes and no.
Mm.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to show a person their perspective and really encourage that person to come up with their own narrative of what misery can look like, or how bad things can be.
Yeah.
And then looking for the tools to be able to explain them out of that, or to encourage them out of that.
Right.
But it's sometimes a person may just not be ready for that.
Yeah.
It's an unfortunate part. And so I think it takes just a lot of things. I think it really takes loving on people. I think it takes supporting and encouraging people in a way that is different.
Mm.
It's almost radical.
Yeah.
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 It kind of has to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with homelessness and addiction and all of that, how does this affect our community? Because it is a community issue.
Sure.
And what can people do to help support this, in these causes, like certain organizations? Like what can we do as a community to make this better?
I think it's going to take a combination of working with local government to continue to address the narrative of, we need more resources, we need more beds, we need more access to funding that specifically helps individuals who are trying to come out of homelessness.
Yeah.
Or how do we, if we can, one of the things that I do in my role is use data to be able to tell a story.
That's important.
It is.
Yeah.
Right. And
Very
so
important.
if we can continue to show people what it looks like for a person getting help, whether that's mental health, treatment, support, substance use, chronic homelessness, whatever that looks like, right? If we're able to show those that have the power, those that have the money, to show them how much it can significantly impact the community by offering more services.
Mm-hmm.
I think the organizations that are available in San Antonio are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And they're doing a great job.
Yes.
There's just a need for more.
For more.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a need for more. And I think on that, like on the other side, like on like the people side, the people who are going through this or who have family members that are going through this, I think the education portion
Absolutely.
is such a huge part of it. It's like, I cannot tell you how many people I've met. They're like, I just don't know what's available.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I could get this kind of help or that kind of help. And, you said it's, for me, it's like, God, like how do we get that to the masses? And I
Sure.
think a lot of that for me is, with my job and everything that I do, it's like, how can I tell the story effectively enough and to reach a broader audience so that we're getting this word out?
Yeah.
Because it's so important, because a lot of people don't know. I mean, like
Yeah.
you're a 20-something-year-old kid and you're deep in your addiction, but like maybe you could have had you known what some of these programs were
Sure.
at that point. We don't know that, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you never know. But it's like, how do you educate? How do you reach your audience? Because right now it's like, yes, you're with the people that you have like in that facility, but how do you tell that story to a broader audience?
Honestly, I say yes to any conversation where it allows me to talk about what I've experienced.
Mm-hmm.
I like your job, right? Because I think that you've done a really good job of creating awareness.
Yeah.
I think that we need to have these conversations wherever we go,
Yeah. All the time.
all the time. I mean, there have been times where I just butt into conversations at Starbucks or something, you know what I mean? To be able to,
You're like, hey, hold on.
I'm at coffee shops just like, well, let me just tell you,
Right.
here's, and literally I went to this thing on yesterday, matter of fact, and they were talking about homelessness and addiction and all these things. And then the lady next to me, she made a, slick kind of comment. And I was like, hey, here's my card. And I said, let me tell you a little bit about what we do. And then come to find out, she says, well, I have a son. We don't know what to do. I said, my personal number's on there. Tell him to call me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so if we're able to keep the conversation going through having these uncomfortable conversations to create awareness, whether through social media or in person,
Yeah.
I think that we just have to get the word out. I
Yeah.
think that's the best thing. We just have to continue to get the word out. Sometimes it's uncomfortable and sometimes,
Absolutely.
but
It's an uncomfortable topic.
yeah.
I mean, I'll bring it up every once in a while, and sometimes people just they either and I don't know if you've experienced this. They either don't want to hear it,
Yeah.
or they're all in. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know that number. Like, that's the statistic.
Yeah.
And they're fascinated by it, and it makes them want to learn more. And I appreciate when that happens.
Yeah.
Because it's like, man, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it just takes, like, because then maybe that person will tell somebody else, or, and so I think talking about it and then learning how to talk about it,
Sure.
because that's important too. Because sometimes people, they don't want to hear, but if you are communicating in a way, because I feel like you're really big on education.
Absolutely.
And the way that you speak and the way that you educate others, like, I always feel very inclusive. Like, when I talk to you, like when I hear you speak at engagements and stuff, I'm like, man, like, you make people want to listen. And I think that is so powerful and important, but also, like, just, it's necessary.
It is. One of the things that I heard somebody do that I've really started incorporating is that for when we find those conversations with individuals who will say, well, I'm interested, tell me more.
Yeah.
I'll have that conversation, but while I'm ending that conversation is, who else do you know that would be interested in sitting down to come meet with me? I said, I'm
Right.
happy to take them to lunch, let's do coffee, or can I bring you on for a tour so that I can show you a little bit more of how we are working to be the change that we want to see in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have to make those changes.
Yeah.
And even though it's small, like little bits here and there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's we're doing what we can
Sure.
with what we got.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so if, maybe the county or the city or whoever gave us some more resources, whether monetarily or
Yeah.
just access.
Yes.
Just access. Just Tell me who I need to talk to.
Yeah, just
That's
pull
what.
up.
That's just pull up.
Just
That's
pull up.
that's literally, that's literally it right there, right? Like, who do I need to talk to?
Yeah.
You know, I jokingly tell my board of directors and my executive staff, I'm like, well, hold on, who do I need to talk to?
Yeah.
Right? Because I know that it's through conversation that we're able to build relationships. And if we're able to build relationships in the process, hopefully we would be able to find the necessary resources to be able to create more change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What advice would you give to your 20-something-year-old self from yourself right now, knowing what you know, experiencing what you've experienced? What would you tell him?
I tell them, don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't seek validation don't seek validation in the behavior. Don't hang out with those people. I mean, there's so many messages that I would tell my 20-year-old self.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that I would say is don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you know what, and maybe this is just the journey that I had to go on
Sure.
in order to get where I'm at today.
Yeah.
One of my mentors, he told me, he said, well, you're now being your most authentic self. I said, all right, cool, maybe, right? But he said, you're being who you were supposed to be 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And I said, nah, maybe not.
Right.
I said, maybe I had to go through that in order to get here.
Yeah.
And I said, and here I am.
Yeah.
Right. And so I said, I don't want to shoulda, coulda, woulda, if, whatever, right?
Right.
But if I had that chance, yeah, I would totally tell my younger self, do not do it.
Yeah.
Right. And I can think of several things at the age of 20 that I did that if somebody would have really been there to lovingly and encouragingly tell me, do not do that.
Right.
I may have listened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you wish people knew about addiction and homelessness? I think there's a lot of speculation.
Sure. Well, the thing about addiction is that I believe in an addiction from the disease model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That maybe there's a predisposition that it can affect a person and not affect a person. I've seen tons of people whose family members were involved in the lifestyle and they saw how destructive it was and they decided not to be a part of that. But then I've seen people who, like myself, whose immediate family was not involved in the lifestyle.
Right.
But because of trauma, right, I naturally held on to that. And so if we're able to see it from the mindset of it's a disease, right? Once we are there, we cannot control it, and that it affects everyone differently. But those that it does affect, if we're able to really just see it from the standpoint of it's a disease, how can we help? We're going to get you some treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then for homelessness, I would rethink. And I really do my best now to tell people that not everyone who is homeless has a drug or alcohol problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, not everyone.
There's so many.
Our economy is high, right? And for single mothers, single fathers, elderly individuals, individuals who have lost everything and everyone.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to get back on your feet.
It is.
And so sometimes the alternative is not emotionally or mentally easier, but physically it's just, this is what I got to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, to survive. Yeah.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that have. I mean, just we're all kind of like, most of us anyways, are like a paycheck away, 1 or 2 paychecks away, right? A major medical event happens to you, your significant other passes away, or like, you know what I mean? There's so many things that could happen that can lead to homelessness. And it always bothers me a little bit, like the number of people that they make their assumptions and they stick to that, right? And I think that's part of why I love what I do, is because I can help people talk about their story and get it out there and say, okay, like, this is actually what happened to me. Like, your story needs to be heard. Everybody has a story.
Absolutely.
And so the more that we tell these stories and people are heard, because that's all anybody wants, right? Like, we're all human, we're all people. People want to be heard, period. And so the more we can give them that voice or that platform to use their voice, it's like, God, like, we need to do that.
I think if we were able to bring the humanness back when talking about individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and maybe not just seeing them for what they're experiencing, but seeing them as just people.
They're people.
They're people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man. Well, I could talk to you forever.
Sure. This has been a really good conversation.
Yeah, it has. I've really enjoyed hearing your story. I mean, I've heard your story before, but I feel like I've heard the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
And so my story is kind of unique in the sense that I experienced a whole lot in a little bit of time.
Right.
Well, I say a little bit of time, but I mean, I experienced a lot of really traumatic, scary situations in a 16 to 17-year period of my life that sometimes I can, tell different parts and of different things that happened. And yeah. So I think about, everything that I've gone through and where I'm at today. And, I don't know if this is a question, but I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
Selfishly kind of throw this in here.
I love it. Go for it.
If there's one thing that I could tell anyone who is watching this today, I would really want to express that hopelessness does not have to continue to be the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Change is possible. I live in a community of individuals who are in recovery from substance use disorder and alcoholism, and individuals who don't have the disease, but are able to come together, support each other, and work with individuals to help them to see life.
Yeah.
Change is possible.
Change is possible.
Absolutely.
I love that, to help them see life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because there's life on the other side.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's good life.
It is.
Yeah.
What's your favorite thing what's the most rewarding aspect of your job now, right now, in this moment, like where you're at currently?
The most rewarding thing for me is when I see the light come on in a person's eyes. When they tell me, hey, I got the keys, or I bought a car, or I've had a job for a year, or my wife said I can come home.
Wow.
Or they're going to give me my kids back.
Yeah.
It's those moments. That's the most rewarding.
Yeah.
My life is pretty good today, right? I've got everything that I've ever, for the most part, most everything I've ever really wanted.
Yeah.
But to see that in someone else who just a short time ago was hopeless.
Yeah.
That's the greatest thing I love about this life, about this job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what you were meant to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're going to make me cry. It is. It's beautiful. And it's like to see you, because you and I, we haven't known each other that long, like maybe 2 years, but I feel like, knowing you and hearing your story and seeing the impact that you make on our community, but also like each and every individual that's in, the facility. It's just like, man, like I don't know who else could have done a great, a better job than you. Like it's just been,
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Like I feel like this is like where you were meant to be seated at that table. You know what I mean? Well, if this podcast can help in that I'm so excited to be
Yeah.
a part of this, this with you and with
For
our
sure.
community. Yeah.
Well, the really cool thing about this podcast is that it is going to,
Yeah.
right? Because somebody's going to hear,
Yes.
right? Alcoholism, drug addiction, homelessness, and untreated mental health disorders is something that if that's not affecting us, we know somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. And so the reason why this is going to work and this is going to create awareness and this is going to lead people to seeing change is because your heart's in the right place, right? And you're having the conversations and asking the questions and you're bringing things out of people that's going to, when people watch it, it's like, oh, well, this is what I need. Or, oh, I need to figure out how to get them connected to.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is going to
Yeah.
work.
It will work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, man, thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for being on the show and for coming in here and being vulnerable and telling your story and just sharing your experiences with us. Because this is it's important for us to hear and for our community to know, that change is possible.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I know we can't mention organizations, but if people wanted to follow you on social media, are you open to having people follow you on socials or?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Where can they find you?
So you can go to Facebook and it's under my full legal name, Ben Franklin Brooks Jr.
Okay.
Or because my name is Ben Franklin, my Instagram is c.note831.
Okay.
C-note Ben Franklin. Yeah. So, or you can find me on LinkedIn. And
Yeah.
so to really kind of see a little bit more the organization and the work that we're getting the opportunity to do in order to serve our community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody go follow, go share the stories and all of that. Well, I really enjoyed having you on this show. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. Please share this story with anyone that you think you might know that will need to hear this story. So tune in every Wednesday for a new episode, and we will see y'all next time.